Hello, and welcome to World Building Symbols and Rituals. I'm the moderator of this panel, Julia Rios. I'm a writer, editor, podcaster, and narrator, and I'm just here to facilitate this discussion between four other talented writers. And I'd like to start by asking everyone here to introduce themselves. My pronouns for this panel will be they, them, and I want to ask everyone, please tell us your name, a little bit about your connection to world building, and your pronouns. And I'll start with Valerie.
Hello, I'm Valerie Estelle Frankel, she, her, and when I was 16, I started writing my first novel, and I did this immense world building that soon became this massive website with all these subpages. In fact, the novel never got published because it sounded like a 16-year-old wrote it, but I kept up with the world and spin-off books and short stories for quite some time before moving on to nonfiction. And now I write nonfiction where pretty much all I do is analyzing the symbolism in whatever fantasy world and whatever's up with. If you really look at the details of how they did Wonder Woman's sword, it suggests all kinds of things. So yeah, let's analyze. Oh,
Great.
and I've got a free world building kind of seminar for people if anyone would like.
Okay, awesome. And I'm assuming Valerie will be posting the link to the seminar in the Discord Scioto room odd at the end of this panel. So if you're watching this in Discord, you should be able to see all these links. If you just stick around for a couple minutes after the panel, our panelists will go there and drop links. Thanks so much, Valerie. Let's go to Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Sullivan. I write young adult fantasy and science fiction. I started writing when I was 14. So I created short stories, which my worlds exist in, and pronouns are she, her, and we'll get into more in the discussion.
Okay, Elle?
I'm Fonzie Lewis. I'm a writer, editor, art director over at Fine Literary Magazine. I am director of FineCon. I am often loud on Twitter. And mostly in my writing, I pull from a lot of sort of a mixed bag of cultures, symbology, stuff like that. And I look forward to talking about that a little bit further.
Great. And Sherwood?
My name is Sherwood Smith. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I started writing about another world when I was 8 years old and wanted to know how it worked. So I started reading history as a teenager in English because that's what I spoke. And most of my college and graduate work has all been in European history. However, 5 years ago, I started immersing very deeply in Asian history and languages. And wow, I thought I knew a lot about the building of a civilization and ritual, but I basically started at ground zero, but it's awesome.
All right. So I think that segues really well into the first question that I had said I would ask all of you, which was what kinds of worlds have you personally created? And Sherwood, I'm going to start with asking you to just expand a little bit more because you said you started writing an alternate world when you were 8 years old and then you studied deeply European history to flesh that out. What kinds of worlds have you personally created and how have your studies sort of influenced that?
Well, I'll try to be as brief as possible. My process, I'm very visually oriented. And so I see a story, I see images, and then I have to figure out why it's the way it is. In other words, my characters live in a castle. By the time I was 11 or 12, I had to think, well, why are they in a castle? Why aren't they in a hut? Why aren't they in a 40-story building? And part of me said, well, I didn't have the language for this, but this was the process. Castles to me were more beautiful, and I wanted to write about beautiful things. So then I had to make it work. And so all along, I've been figuring out how and what, why did people live in castles? What did they make them out of? Why didn't they, when did they change? La, la, la. You can see where that's going. The second big shift was in how the social contract is built and what causes governments to be formed and the tension between human beings. By the time I was 15, I remember telling a friend who said to me, I remember this is the mid 60s, are there homos in your world? And I said, no, there are no homos in my world. But I knew that that kept bothering me. And finally, I figured out it wasn't that there weren't possibly gay or different sort of choices. It was that it didn't matter to the people there. And it changed everything. It changed everything in the world building. So I started reading about psychology and behavioral psychology. And anyway, I've always been doing parallel reading alongside it. I think that answers that question.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a great answer. Thank you. So Elle, let's move to you next. What kinds of worlds have you personally created?
Well, in my novella, A Ruin of Shadows, it is actually that story is it started out as a vignette of this one particular character in the history of another novel trilogy that I had written that has not sold yet, so we won't go there. But in it, there is a villainous entity known as Aspacios, or the Empty in Portuguese. And what they do is they are a colonizing entity, in that what they do is they sort of explore other places to steal culture, color, the health, the vibrancy of the world in order to sustain themselves, because they are empty. And in that context, because I'm taking something that's sort of metaphorically done in our understanding of colonization, I take it and I have to turn it into sort of a physical manifestation. So the cultural, the theft of life, it becomes a sickness, and it's represented by little white flies and all of that other stuff. But that story essentially, it happens after this war to get these people off of the continent and sort of keep them off. What happens from there, there's a lot of magic in a mask. There's sorts of invincibility things that are pulled from ritualistically, Santeria specifically. And you can tell sort of the difference between Santeria has a lot in common, essentially derived from Yoruba Ifa traditions. And you can tell by sort of the terminology used, particularly within those two faiths juxtaposed, based on what language is used in the languages. So if there's a reference to bead wearing in Ifa culture, you'd be calling it, Ilikis in the text. Santeria wise, it'd be collar. So there are small little things that if you are in tune with sort of those marginalized faiths, those things that aren't common in the West, that you can pick up on, whereas they're just nice little details for anyone who doesn't know.
Okay, yeah, that's a great point. So I think we'll come back to some of that later. Kathy, tell us about the worlds that you've written.
Well, started off with a portal fantasy. So some of the elements in that world was based more in European culture. But then I started focusing on the talking horses that were also there. What were their swear words? What were they revering? How did they acknowledge an elder? How did they listen to the winds in their case? And then I started writing short stories about aliens coming to Earth and attending college. Like, okay, well, what do you do with a parrot-like creature for apologizing a lot because their tail keeps knocking down everything? And little elements like that. What do you use for apology? What do you do for just basically a greeting? Because when you've got claws on your fingers, are you really going to be shaking your hands? No. And just setting up various things that way.
Okay. Oh, these are so many good points. Valerie, tell us about the worlds that you've written. I know you've done a lot of criticism, but you said you started out with building your own worlds. So tell us a little bit about those.
Yes. Probably on the conventional fantasy side. At the time, I'd read a lot of very conventional fantasy. Um, but I I did big picture and little picture. Like the big picture was the angels are in charge of the society and nobody's going to find it out until like book 15 or something. So I was busy subtly dropping, when those characters are talking to each other or some of the rituals they've set up, because they're all basically taking care of a group of people, and some of them are guiding them very hands-on and some are guiding very hands-off. But again, in the language, in the things where they say, no, I do not want to be worshipped, again, they're setting up who they really are. So that's the big picture stuff. And then little picture, again, yes, what are your swear words if these are your gods, or if you say there aren't any gods, or how do you do this? What book is everybody reading? What do you say after you burp? I was having loads of fun with that. And of course, ritual. I remember people would read my novels and sometimes they'd say, well, if you've got this Beauty and the Beast story where the girl is really not happy about it, maybe you don't have her saying like I do at the ceremony, because maybe this is a patriarchal culture enough that the woman doesn't say anything. And there have been a lot of those on Earth. So you take a look at your rituals and you ask questions like, what would the people in this society be pushing for or not pushing for or thinking is normal? And I was trying to create a lot of difference and conflict between my little societies, again, down to the symbolism. So I would be sitting there going, okay, these people have a very open, personally directed religion, and it's very much based in four, and that goes down to like Earth, the four directions, land-based, a bit subtly goddess stuff. Whereas these guys are very into hierarchy and everything's about who's on top and who do you report to. So you can have the numbers, the colors, the toys, the expressions, a lot of the stuff just kind of subtly feed into that.
Okay. So I'm hearing lots of different kinds of worlds in the things that you've written. And one thing that stuck out to me about all of yours is the different starting points. So it sounds like for Sherwood, it was imagining people living in a castle because you felt like a castle was a beautiful place. And then the world building kind of sprawled out from there. How do people live in castles and why? And for Kathy, you have a similar sort of story with that there are talking horses, which I don't know why you wanted talking horses in your world, but I'm assuming maybe it's because you love the idea of talking horses. And then it's what kind of swear words do they use, which is a hilarious question. I feel like one takeaway from this panel is going to be what kind of swear words do talking horses use. But that seems like a growth point. For Elle, it sounded like a different origin. It sounded like maybe the origin of your world was the concept of theft, that theft of culture and of life. And so that's coming from a very different starting place. And I think that how that affects everyone in your culture is going to change the way that you build your world. And for Valerie, I think that you're just kind of taking all of the idea of having a different world, and that's your starting point. Your starting point is like, how do I make everything fantasy and different? So there wasn't necessarily one specific particular aesthetic that you wanted. But I'm wondering for all of you how much you consciously think about putting in symbols and rituals into your world building. Do you do that intentionally? And how much significance does that have for you? And if you don't do it intentionally, do you notice later that you've built it in accidentally? And I'll start with Elle, because I think your world is just so ripe for all kinds of symbols and rituals.
Yes, I do it intentionally. I think I've done it in almost all of my long form fiction written to date. And it usually comes from having to manufacture different faiths for the purposes of fiction. you kind of you look at what worship entails. What does the worship require in order to do whatever it is that they're believed to be doing? And you sort of build out from there. Most recent project is sort of a Little Mermaid retelling in which Ursula comes back into the picture, but as something of a self-created god. And with that, she's birthed these different societies, most of them Mer, obviously. Mer being my in-world term for just mermaids, it's a whole thing. And then you have the humans on land who revere her for that because of their dependence on the ocean, et cetera, et cetera. You look, in my world, she's a bit more tangible of a god. You can actually reach out and have conversations with her and, and sort of determine from her what it is she'd like to see in terms of, if you want me to do something, this is what I need you to do for me first. And so I sort of, all of the rituals contained in this particular story, all of the rituals, the symbology and everything created for her worship or her denial specifically, come direct from her. So I have to, she's not a good person in this one either. So I had to kind of come up with bits and pieces of things that not good people might want in terms of being worshipped. So that's been fun. And I look forward to having announcements to share on that soon.
Okay, so when you were talking about in your previous answer, you mentioned that like white flowers would be symbolic of death. And I'm assuming there are other symbols that you have and rituals that you have associated with the theft of culture and the death and all of those things. How many of those did you set out to put in, and how many kind of arose organically while you were writing?
So the concept was sort of birthed in a different short story, which I haven't published anywhere, called The Color Thief. And it was this character, the protagonist, she had this ability to sort of determine an object's value based on the vibrancy of the color that it emanated essentially to her. And she stole it. But it wasn't like a cultural theft thing. It was just like she's a regular thief and just like shiny stuff. And in her pursuit of one specific object in this story, she comes across Asphasius, and there are these tiny sort of withered beings kind of cloaked in things, and they have what are essentially like marbles for eyeballs, which they use similar to the protagonist in the story, but they use it to target people whose life forces essentially that they will consume at some point. And then the people who have touched by them, the color thief notices sort of pallor, sluggishness in their movements, things that appear sort of washed out where they were once very bright, things like that. So I think my original symbology where that's concerned came with the use of color. And then the white flies being the absence of that would have been the antithesis. So where there is life, there is color, there's all of this additional energy, the white flies come to take all of that away.
Okay. Kathy, I'm going to go to you next because I feel like the Discord chat has been very excited about your swearing horses. And we have some people wondering about things like, is break a leg a major curse in horse talk and things like that. I'm wondering with your horses, again, going into that question of like how much symbolism and ritual is there? And are there cursing sort of ritualistic curses that, because I think the ways that we curse people are in some way a small ritual.
Well, yes, break a leg would be a severe curse, but it's more of the way I've got that world set up. The talking horses are descended from another intelligent race, so they are very resentful of magic. So one of the worst things is that they don't like to hang around wizards, and I have some horses who I basically have to because they're trying to break a witch's curse on the land. But the thing is too, when I'm thinking of the horses, they don't just have verbal curses, because you've got the body language, you've got the ears, you've got the tail, the different movements that all incorporates the curse thing. So like some people here, you could basically say something pleasantly, but when you're looking at their body language and what symbol they're doing with their hands, that's going to basically kind of negate the pleasant words. So I'm just looking at the thing saying flying, but yeah, just basically having irritations. I'm kind of throwing myself off here. So
Okay. Did you build symbols and rituals into your world, or did that just kind of happen? Do you notice them after the fact?
uh, I'm a pantser, so when I was writing the stories, I was just basically going along going, oh, I need to have a curse word here. Oh,
Hmm.
why are they resentful to this? And it just kept throwing up that way, and just saying, well, I mean, even with my bird aliens, I'm owned by a bird. So I know what she means when her crest goes up and the feathers are going a particular way. So throwing in the body language then too adds a lot more to the story.
Okay. Sherwood, what about you?
Well, I think I started thinking about cursing early on, and it is a ritual. And what constitutes a curse word says a lot about a culture. So, in my particular case, where sex is nothing shameful, for instance, there is no sexual swearing, there is no rape. I figured that out really early. I didn't want a world with rape, so I had to figure out how it got there. So I figured women got to magic first when people went through the world gate. And since women pretty much have the power, they put magic into making life better, into making things clean, cleaning water, la, 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 la. I don't want to fall down the rabbit hole talking about that. Back to swearing. So, what are the swear words? What are the things that make you angry, concern power, concern relationships in different ways? So, fuck you doesn't mean anything in my world, but uh, Soul Eater does. It's a profound incident, and damnation actually has a meaning, because there's nah, not even going to go there. It's too easy to talk too long about 50 years of work. So um, better stop there.
Okay, so I think you gave us some really good eye-opening clues into how your world building works. But did you decide when you started, I guess when you started, you were 8, so maybe you didn't decide at that point, but as you've kind of matured your world, have you consciously included rituals and symbols, or is this something that you write the world and then you notice the rituals and symbols are there built in afterwards?
Both, because I'm visual, I see it, and then I've got to figure out why it is that way. And I see the details of embroidery on a robe, and I have to figure out what that means. So
Mm.
as I'm reading, and also as I'm reading, constantly reading history, I see something, go, oh, I know what that is, and then I adapt it to my world. As far as ritual is concerned, um, one of the things I noticed being a junior high kid, and and crowds of bullies would cruise around looking for outliers like me to beat up, is how mobs work and how people coalesce into groups, and how there can be groups that do nice things and groups that are just angry and looking to be destructive. And even before I had the language, I figured out that ritual can diffuse tension because everybody is willingly participating. So, building rituals that everybody wants to participate in and how you feel when you come out of it is important. So, rituals are not empty, they are meaningful. And how does it stay that way? How do rituals evolve? What are the symbols that are powerful for people that speak to the heart or that communicate sometimes secretly?
Mm.
All of this sort of stuff goes into it.
Yeah, that's all a very good thought. Valerie, I wanted to take yours in a slightly different direction and dig into your critical side, because I know you've done so much critical analysis of other people's world building. And I'm wondering, when you do that, how much is apparent to you that they extremely carefully thought through, or how much seems to have just kind of dropped into a work and people analyzing it can pull things out of it that maybe the author didn't intend?
Oh, yes. I definitely have done some of the ones where I'm probably going way beyond what the author was thinking. But as somebody, basically, symbolism, there are repeat patterns, and yes, I could specify, Western culture has one set and other cultures often have completely different sets. Like, in some places white is mourning, in some places white is innocence. You get different colors around the world and so forth. But for instance, the Wonder Woman movie, where is their ritual space? Where's the throne room? It's this underground natural cavern with spirals everywhere. And I took one look and said, whoever designed this did know their feminine symbolism and was sitting there going, we're doing something very different from the man-made, the men are in the tallest tower in the most built-up part of the city, because we're going back to the ancient place, again, a very feminine space that they were creating deliberately. So you absolutely see people tying into the oldest structures we have, the oldest patterns we have, instead of just going, I like blue, so everything on Wonder Woman's island will be blue, and off we go. And in that case, yes, I, the critic, might be going, well, blue could be representing the Virgin Mary, but it could also not remotely be doing that, and I could be making all this up. Which, yeah, back to my literary analysis, sometimes I find myself doing that. But in something like The Mandalorian is always going around masked, why? Because he's mysterious, because masks give power, because masks give a kind of, not just anonymity, but I am taking my power from this. I want you, this is the face I want the world to see instead of my vulnerable human one. That's pretty universal.
Okay. So, segueing off from there to all of you who are writing your own worlds now, how much significance does ritual have in a world, and what does a ritual tell us about a world? And I'd love it if you would each give me one example from a world that you've written of a ritual and what it means within that world, what it tells us about that world. And I'll start with Sherwood, because I think you probably have tons of them.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the shortest. In one particular place where manners are especially important, you never step on anybody else's shadow, because that is an insult. And what it says is people are very aware of personal, not only boundaries and personal space, but where you are in a room, for shorthand, where the power center is in a room, and who is there and who is away from it, and how everybody is spaced around it.
So not only do you not step on people's shadows, but people are aware of where the shadows are falling. And
Yes.
so they are aware of where they place themselves in a room so that their shadow will or won't fall in certain spaces.
And how they light rooms when it's dark, or even during the day. If you intend, your intentions can be stated by the fact that if you have a lamp over on one side, or you have lights at all four corners. What does that immediately say when you walk into a room? If there's a lamp at one side, what does that suggest to you? That there's an important person is going to be where, and less important are where, and there's visually there's a sharp divide there, because you can be crossing in front of somebody else. But if there are lights at all four corners, what does that say to you? Somebody wants peace.
Okay. And why is stepping on a shadow such a big deal?
I did figure out, I haven't worked with that one for a while, but I did figure out why, when that happened, and it was in prehistory, when people were evolving the social contract. And it basically had to do with personal space and the claims of those in power and those who follow those in power. And it would take too long to go into that. But anyway, I figured it out.
Okay, so that's a great example. Elle, do you have an example from your world?
Going back to the Little Mermaid retelling, there's this practice of sending bodies back to sea, essentially, you know, from the sea they came to the sea so return, that kind of thing. Where the bodies or the sarcophagi or whatever are accompanied by a trail of these very pungent, very fragrant flowers with these properties that sort of dispel certain predators in the water, but notify the myrrh, essentially, that someone is being returned home and to be taken care of and things like that. And the flower trail essentially shows where they came from. So to be treated a certain type of way. That's probably the most significant because it's plot relevant to the story, and I can't exactly get into that, but it also, in the world as it's advancing, it's leaving some of these older ways behind, but it's a relevant practice because it's something that it explains the history of the place, and then also, you know, sort of it explains the allegiance to the sea by this particular country. I'm trying to like talk around spoilery things and things that I may not be allowed to talk about, so it's hard. But yeah, it's one of my favorite things, and it irritates my the protagonist greatly because she has to like take part of it, and her hands are always got like this flowery oil on it. It's nauseous. It's great.
Okay. All right. And Kathy, what about you? Are there specific rituals that your horses use?
Well, not with the horses. I did have an alien who came to a spaceport, and they were trying to find. They had a creature they called a luck beast on their planet, but the invaders to their planet killed most of the life form except for the ones they wanted to enslave. So those aliens are now in search of some other creature they could use for a luck beast, and they find a substitute. I'm not going to spoil the short story, but the administrator of the port is watching them as they are conducting the ritual to bless the ships, and then they turn around and start blessing the port too. It was just kind of fun to picture it.
So did you, when you thought of that ritual, were you thinking about rituals that we use in human society to bless ships at all? I know that we can christen a ship by breaking a bottle of champagne over the bow, and there are other things that people do to ensure safe travel.
It was basically part of the, that brings up another story I had too. But in this case, it was more of just Roman Catholic, so I still have that kind of background where you basically flick things at things to bless them. And so I did have that incorporate a little bit of what they use to basically flick the blessing towards the ship and then the port. You know, yeah, didn't even think about that, but yeah.
Okay, interesting. So maybe we're opening up new avenues of thought for you. Valerie, I will open this up to you. You can talk about your own writing if you want, or you can talk about something else that you have encountered, but give me a really good example of a ritual and how it tells us something about the society that it's coming from.
I did come up with a lot of coming of age ceremonies and things like that because I find I write a lot about the heroine's journey and symbolic coming of age moments and, you know, Buffy and things like that. So there are so many interesting coming of age metaphors. But during this, I found myself thinking of the Klingon Wedding in Deep Space Nine, because just in that one episode, we suddenly got so much Klingon culture. And you could find the wedding stupid and ridiculous and jarring with the 10 years we'd learned about Worf before then, or not, whatever. But in the episode with the Klingon wedding, they tell a foundational myth about where the Klingons come from. They say that even though we hadn't discussed it in all these years, actually the female head of the household is in charge of rituals like that and can withhold permission. Hello. They tie in stuff that we'd already learned about the duties of your house and the duties you have to your house, and the thing where getting tortured beforehand shows how cool and buff you are. So, Worf's bachelor party ends up being about what we'd expect from a Klingon bachelor party, to the disappointment of the humans. We see the woman, not only the bride has the Klingon cleavage everyone was joking about from previous Klingon women, but you see her ritually battling with a sword. And there are not that many weddings on Earth, I would think, where the bride and groom ritually battle each other with swords during the ceremony. You just get, and Jadzia specifically says this is a traditional Klingon wedding, the way they traditionally do it if you're pulling out all the stops. So we just got so much about their values, their customs, their colors, their decor, what you do, that was supposed to look all Klingon. And I have no idea how many Earth humans felt the need to go off on that.
All right, that's a great example. And that leads me into the last question that I had for all of you, which was to tell me about a world that's written by someone else that feels alive to you because of the rituals and the symbols that you see in it. It doesn't have to be solely because of that, but they should play a part in it. And I feel like, Valerie, your Klingon example was great. Your Wonder Woman example was great. We'll come back to you in a little bit to get a third one. But I'm going to start with Kathy this time. Tell me about a world that you've enjoyed, and partly at least because of the rituals and the symbols in it.
I'll give you two.
Okay.
Laden Universe by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. The Ladens have this ritual set of bowing, and the manners are just, they've got this whole code of honor you're supposed to follow. And if you transgress those particular bows, or the high houses get really, really, really minute detail of their life. And also C.J. Cherry's Foreigner series, because her, and I'm going to mispronounce how the aliens are spelled, so I'm just going to say her alien race has all these different traditions, starting with tea drinking, which is also in the Laden universe, that are just, I always see criticism of the Foreigner series that it's so slow paced, but oh my gosh, the culture and the rituals and the whole method of how their society is run is just fascinating to read.
Okay. Elle, tell me about a world that you've particularly enjoyed.
I'll say R.F. Kuang's Poppy War, that the entire series. And you know what? No, I think that's just my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about that world makes it come alive for you?
I was really a big fan of the amount of detail that she was allowed to go into. With God, I just love everything, and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. I just want you to really go and read it and love on it, please. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.
Okay, so that is a recommendation for R.F. Kuang's The Poppy War and the sequels to it that are coming. All right, Sherwood, tell me about a world that someone else has created that you felt immersed in, at least in part because of the symbols and rituals.
I think the first one was Lord of the Rings, which I read when I was 14. A friend discovered it. It was a year before the popularity, so she checked it out of the library and said, the first thing she said to me was, "There's a grown-up doing what we're doing." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "And it's really good." And I thought, okay. And she said, "But you have to read The Hobbit first." And I said, I'm not reading that. I hate stories about dressed up animals. It makes no sense. Animals driving cars and wearing suits. And she said, no, hobbits are not dressed up animals. I went, okay. So anyway, I was blown away. The second one I'd have to say would be, there are a lot of them I like, but I think the one that's interesting me right now is just a second.
Okay, Valerie, do you want to give us an example? Oh, nope, Sherwood's got a book. Hold on. We're going to see what it is. Okay, what is that book?
The Story of the Stone.
Okay.
Sometimes called The Dream of the Red Chamber, and it's 5 volumes long. And it's just full of ritual and symbolism. And in it, the writer is very delicately and obliquely criticizing the emperor, which is something that could get you killed when this was written in the mid 1700s. It's modern as far as Chinese history is concerned. There's a lot older stuff. I've got the Three Kingdoms over there, which is also interesting because it's a history and yet there's magic and so forth in the history. Anyway, so the ritual and the symbolism is absolutely fascinating.
Okay. And Valerie, do you want to give us another example of a world that you felt particularly well drawn and immersive because of its rituals and symbols?
For rituals and symbols, I might recommend taking another look at Game of Thrones because, the drowned god, the trees, the rituals they have really do direct their cultures a lot. But one I'd rather talk about is Daughter of Smoke and Bone, which came out, basically was the best, in my opinion, of the we're doing angel dystopia for teens novels. And in this one, on the one hand, the angels and demons are at war, and yeah, the demons are more the protagonist, although nobody's totally right. We've seen that in a lot of series. But when you look at their world, which has many different kinds of demons, so the wings and the this and the that, and their whole city is encompassed by iron bars, which on the one hand keep out the angels, on the other hand, they have caged themselves to try to win this thing, so they're ruining their society in their attempt to win. And their whole society is based on the fact that you can resurrect your dead. And that's their big, 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 big secret that is giving them their only advantage against the angels, etc., etc. And so they're doing so much with, the prince has this sexual fetish and he only wants to marry a girl who hasn't been resurrected. And our heroine is a resurrectionist who's sneaking better ingredients in when she's resurrecting her sister. So because of the resurrection thing, everything they're doing has such symbolism toward that. And the resurrection itself uses incense censers and is taking a lot from our religion. And again, you've got some big secrets and surprises and twists. And meanwhile, in our world, the story starts with a human whose job it is to go around the world collecting teeth. And no, I don't mean baby teeth. Why? Signaling that this is, fairyland with the bargains and the ingredients, but not a nice one, not a sugary and sweet one. This is that, there's a serious price tag on anything you want here.
Okay, we are about 5 minutes away from panel end. So I wanted to give you one rapid fire round and then have you all close out with some recommendations for where to find your work. So the last question I'm going to be asking you is if you had one piece of advice that was double-sided that you could give to a writer who is trying to set out to build a world, what would be one thing they should do and one thing that they should avoid? And I'll start with Valerie.
Pretty much the obvious of think about your favorite series in the whole world and ask yourself what they did right, what they did wrong, what felt artificial and forced, and think about what would a real person do in this situation.
Great. And where can we find your work?
Valerie Estelle Frankel on Amazon, and I'm Silicon Valley Authors here in the dealer's room.
Okay. And will you be dropping your links in the Discord as well? Perfect. Okay. And what about you, Kathy? What is one thing a writer should do, one thing that you would hope they would avoid, and where can we find your work?
One thing I think they should do is look at Patricia Reardy's world building website. She's got all these details: customs, sanitation, city building, food rituals. One thing they should avoid is don't waste so much time building up your world. Start writing and you'll find other things to add as you go along. And name is CatherineSullivan.com. And one of my publishers is in the dealer's room, Zemaya Publishing. And I'll put my links in the Discord at the end.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Elle, tell us about one thing you would give advice to a new writer, one that you would tell them to avoid, and where can we find you?
Do your research. Make sure that in your world building, you are not trampling anyone's traditions, borrowing from their historical horrors, things that don't belong to you. I feel like that was both. Do your research and then don't do those things I just said. And my website, ldlewiswrites.com, that has lists of all of my heretofore published things. You can find me on Twitter at @LTheVillain, ELLE the villain, and read Black Spec Fic. Subscribe to Fire Literary Magazine, FIYAH, and it's pronounced Fire with the hard I,
like
and not
fire.
2 E's. Yes, oddly like fire, like our logo and everything. Not Fia, as you may have heard elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm going to follow up that really quickly. You said do your research and make sure you're not taking from people who have already been trampled. If you could give one starting point piece of advice for how to begin researching, and I realize that this is such a huge topic, you can't possibly go into it in detail, but if you had one jumping off point, what would the first step that you recommend be?
When you start writing, you have an idea of what your characters look like. You have an idea of what's going to happen to them. If they are Black, if they are of darker skin or of muddy brown eyes or anything like that, make sure that you're not dumping them into chattel slavery situations. Just make sure that you are cognizant of the plot structure of your story and make sure that you are not visiting unnecessary horrors on people that are going to sort of make your readers recoil into some ancestral fit.
Okay, thank you. I feel like that's a good starting point. I think there are so many different ones, but I think one tangible piece of advice if you're writing Black or muddy brown skinned characters, that you don't drop them into a slavery situation is a really good starting point. Sherwood, tell us about one piece of advice to do and one thing to avoid, and where we can find you.
You can find me on sherwoodsmith.net, or just look me up, Google, you'll find my website, and it has my bibliography and all that, plenty of world building information. I was going to get an example, but it fell because I've got a giant fan, industrial strength fan blowing behind me. But one piece of advice, if you're actually building a world, one easy way to see time zones and so forth is to get a beach ball and paint it on the beach ball. And the colored segments give you automatic time zone delineators, and you can take the air out of it and it can travel with you. So I made that thing when I was a teenager. It's traveled with me for over 50 years, and it's probably the best $2 I ever invested in for world building. The thing to avoid, I think, is when you're researching, you want to include other cultures. It's great, but don't stick with it. And it's easy to do, particularly for Americans who only read English, to read what white people say about these other cultures. Try to read what the people say about themselves when you're researching their traditions, and it will take longer, and sometimes it takes more to understand where they're coming from. But that's all good. The more work you do to understand, to see the world through their eyes, I think the better writer you become and the better human being.
Thank you so much. And we are completely out of time now. So jump into the Discord, Scioto Room Odd, to continue the conversation. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, Julia.
That was amazing job moderating.